It is Wednesday morning on cliffcentral.com. It's just 6 minutes after 7. We've got a lot of stuff happening. We've still got to try and fit some news into something somewhere, but we could get to that when we get to it. Lebang is here with me, and we are joined by Aspasia Karras, who I mentioned just before the break is also someone well known to our audience before. I mean, you've been here before as a guest. We know you well, but you've also been the editor-at-large for the Sunday Times Lifestyle
and Sunday Times,
Elle Magazine,
Cool.
Marie Claire, the Times itself, and also then your columns, which are regulars.
Yeah.
You're a very accomplished woman. You really are, and you keep
thank you.
keep churning out good stuff.
I had an old relationship with you guys. We remember we used to.
You had your own show.
Yeah, with my buddy.
Yeah, that's right. Aspasia had her own show for a long time.
It's a reunion, guys.
So
cool.
we know you well, and it's nice to see you again.
Thank you. It's nice to be here. I thought I'm gonna get up and come.
Yeah. Well, listen, it's always better to do it in studio, and it's horrible to wake up early. But I said to Simpiwe and Khomolemo earlier this morning, having sat in traffic last week, one of the days when I didn't do the show from here, it's not worth it. I'd rather wake up at 4:30 and be here early and not have to deal with traffic, because sitting in an hour and a half of traffic is horrible. It's soul destroying.
It is.
Right?
It is.
It's really awful. So that is something that you could avoid by just being up earlier. And plus, when you start your day ahead of everyone else, you
guys
finish
are experts at the
by 1 o'clock. You've done everything.
Starting.
You've done all your meetings. Your days, you still have all that leftover time.
So
Aspasia, what time you go to bed? The question.
No, that's the problem. So you do yoga, right? And this is a big part of, everybody has their things in their day that makes it better.
Yoga and boxing.
And bearable. So you're doing boxing as well.
So cool.
I love boxing.
It's really good.
Yeah. And lately I've combined, I first do the boxing and then I teach the boxers yoga.
Wow. So
that's interesting.
You're teacher and student.
Yes.
All right. So all of this stuff makes, life a little bit more colorful and interesting. I mean, I try to go to gym 3-4 times a week because I think it's really important to have things where you look after you.
Yeah.
The ancient Greeks said healthy mind, healthy body.
Right.
And I do believe that.
Yeah, I think that people who only have one of those aren't well balanced. They're probably going to be unhappy. How do you feed your mind? You read?
A lot.
Yeah.
But you have to. I mean, how it is.
Sure.
So especially if you're writing
columns
every week.
Of course.
If you don't read, where are you getting your ideas and source material from, and also expanding your own knowledge, right? Because you can't just sit there and think you already know all the answers. I'll just churn out a column based on stuff I already know. You have to keep improving so you can give other people something to think about.
Yeah, no, it's a problem. But I mean, it is part of my...
It's not a problem, it's a solution.
But it is so I read a lot. I'm subscribed to... from the New York Times, the Guardian, the Atlantic, the London Review of Books.
All very left-wing publications.
And then obviously you have to read the Daily Fail every day.
What's a Daily Fail?
It's what I call the Daily Mail. Just to keep yourself balanced.
Okay, well,
it's balance.
Clearly you're not biased at all with your Atlantic and Guardian and
No. That's why I read the Daily Fail.
Yeah, 1 against 3.
I mean, have you read the Daily Fail lately?
No.
It's enough to it's strong enough, it's powerful enough as content to just I sort of
admire,
balance everything out.
I admire the fact that you're still clinging to those old rusty publications.
Sure.
Of traditional media. No.
Welcome to the
And I know you're still involved. No, but this is why.
What do you read?
No, hang on. This is why I'll tell you what I read in a minute. But this is why you are still one of the people who can do what you do in publishing, right? I think that it's changed a lot. There are so few young people who care about these titles that you've just mentioned. And whether that's good or bad, you can perhaps tell me what you think. I just feel people have moved right on from them. And we know that they're struggling. I mean, magazines, which you used to edit as well, powerful magazines, they used to be so influential. One snap of Aspasia's fingers and she could raise hemlines so high the world was your gynecologist. There was a time.
Very much doubt.
But I mean, women all over the world used to take some of these magazines,
Magazines, yeah.
and they were gospel. And that's changed completely
I
now.
think it has changed, but I do think that something like, I was listening to an interview with the New York Times is owned by a family. So from the old rusty publications, David Remnick, who is the editor of the New Yorker magazine, does a podcast every week. And he was interviewing Salzburg, who is the owner of the New York Times. And that is a publication that completely, it used to be, let's say, quite limited to a New York American kind of context. Huge. But the paper of record essentially for one small community. And it became, under his digital vision, a global force. People like so it became the model that everyone wants to follow. And it is a huge, huge reading public that reads it every day. It became the paper of record, certainly for the left, but on a global scale for everyone.
And used to be certainly one of the most credible sources of information in the world.
But still is, because sometimes when you read something like X, the platform formerly known as Twitter, how do you know what you're actually reading, where it comes from, what there's individual. So, I mean, I'm not arguing against those things. I'm just simply saying, how do you know at this point if anything you're reading hasn't been generated? I mean, Rupert Murdoch's, all his sort of local publications in Australia are actually run by AI, and one solitary sad person sitting behind a desk going, okay, I'm editing this. How?
But
so how do you even know that the AI is generating completely lovely, but generates, stuff that is entirely untrue or manipulated or whatever.
This is why I'm fascinated to have you here, because you've actually experienced the best of both. Like you got to see, I think, maybe you're also too young to have been there in that kind of the heyday
and
when
they sent you to Paris every year.
Yeah, where Anna Wintour was the god of all.
She still is. Last night I was judging the SS Style Awards, which is still a thing 20 odd years later, with Gareth Kutsia, and he said he was, in New York at something and having lunch with Anna Wintour.
Oh wow.
And the thing with Anna Wintour, he said, was that he doesn't believe that bob of hair is real. He was like, it's
a wig.
A wig. I was like, I've seen her.
It's too perfect.
She has a blow dryer every morning, guys.
Well, I mean, I do think those days are kind of over, though. I mean, I saw she's now giving some masterclass that you can buy for $30 or something on the internet. And I thought, it's a bit of a step down.
You're not a subscriber to masterclass.
No, but I think it's a step down. I think it's like a little bit. She was too big a deal. That mystery around her was part of the allure, don't you think? And now publishing has been kind of exposed for what it really was, which was these kind of insular, sort of inward looking, many of them.
Definitely.
Right? And it was like a coterie of people who were all talking to each other about the things that they thought were interesting. And of course, that's what happened in publishing. You had fishing magazines. You had magazines about, stamp collecting. It used to be a massive, massive thing. It just kept expanding in all directions.
But I think it's now all moved just basically
online.
But where you might have chanced upon a broader perspective because everyone read, say, the Sunday Times, my very own organ, which, although I'm pleasantly surprised every week, I see people unexpected people say, oh, I read your column every week, which I find fascinating. I really do. But more interestingly enough, I think there was a common
we used to do
resource.
We used to do stuff together.
Yes.
We don't do stuff together anymore.
Society. And I think all societies. So South Africans everyone would watch on Sunday night, Carte Blanche or Heart Would Sink, that music would come on. Of course. But it was the Sunday night sadness that just layers a pall upon you. But you had a common narrative, which generates and fosters some kind of, whether it was the right narrative or the wrong narrative. I think what has happened is that it's become so insular and everyone is down their own little rabbit hole.
No, I think now, I mean, you can find anything you want now.
You can, but what you're finding and the way the algorithm works is that it will feed you what you want to find.
Yeah, but you also have to curate that stuff. Like you said, you read 3 left publications, 1 right, and you said you have to do that to keep yourself balanced. But it's up to you to decide that. Whereas before it was up to an editor to decide what was going to be put in the only publication that anyone read. Or it's like TV channels. We used to have 3. Remember?
Yeah.
Back in those days?
Now there's 300.
But
Only
I
3.
mean, what is interesting is, yes, you're curating it, but I do think that not having this notion, the paper of record, or having a common experience
but there's a bit of
news
of superiority complex.
No.
Because you're saying, oh no, well, ordinary people can't choose for themselves.
No, of course, ordinary people can. Everyone is an ordinary person. There is no such argument. I'm making a slightly different point, which is that once you get caught up in your own narrative thing, the memes you served, the things you experience, it's not
absolutely true.
It's not everyone's thing. And where it becomes problematic in the sense of, say, a nation state. So here we are, we're South Africa. We're trying to actually gel with a new set of ideas, a coherent civil society that actually speaks and is directed in one way.
It's much harder to corral
people. We can't
people,
do that.
Yeah.
It's not even corral. It's not against freedom of speech or anything. It's just that narrative fragments and your own narrative becomes the dominant one. And it's much harder to get people out of negative ideas. You can end up with in these lagers.
But they always
it's a lager mentality.
Okay, but Aspasia, we know, like the crazy conspiracy theory people always had their papers of record too. The National Enquirer used to publish weekly about things with 8 heads and aliens.
And it transpires that actually we should have been listening to them because now the Congress is having a UFO seating.
Interesting times indeed.
The UFOs were really coming for us.
Yeah.
All right, so
those conspiracists were onto something.
I promise you I didn't bring you here to
right this whole time.
I didn't bring you here to defend print media.
I'm not defending print media in any way.
But I do think the internet allows us to access things that we might never have seen or heard before.
Yeah.
And if people are incurious, which, I mean, let's face it, there are a lot of people who are just not particularly excited about stuff. They sit and consume the same old shit that the algorithm serves them.
Yeah.
There are lots of people like that. Bless them. They also watch the same Marvel movie told 15 times in exactly the same way with a different title, and they'll think it's entertainment.
Yeah.
We can't help everybody. They won't read a book that's longer than that because it's so much effort. And they won't listen to a podcast that's more than 45 minutes because, that's a lot to listen to.
There's definitely like pros and cons to how this has changed. But the biggest con I'm seeing is that everybody thinks they're a journalist now. Everybody feels so entitled to their opinion. And because everybody has access to this information, we just kind of get like the bare minimum of this fact. And then we say, I've got enough to go on and do a whole thing about it. And I'm going to tell everybody this one little piece of this bigger story. And we're all on the same platform. And again, to your point, is it all fake news? Nobody's really getting credible sources anymore. Are we doing the 3 credible sourchap check? No, the first tweet we see, we believe it.
Yeah, well, I mean, just what this is making me think of is I was listening to this chap, the Huberman.
Andrew Huberman.
And he started
I don't know what to make of him.
Well, I mean, whatever you make of him, what was more interesting for me, just apropos what we're talking about, like credible checking of sources, he started doing this thing where they take academic papers and talk through them. So because you get, like, I am guilty of this. I will receive like a high level, like, there are lots of academic institutions that will send you their papers and say, this is the result that we've had. And then you go, oh, okay, so all people who are left-handed have
two
a
IQ
bias
points higher or
to
whatever.
And actually, because you don't have the rigor a scientific practice.
Or frankly, the time you
to
have to know.
wade through that thing. So what I was listening
You
to
grab
was
the
they
headline.
had, yes, you grab the headline and you run with it. And it's so that is what you see a lot of. So, and the journalists are guilty of it. I mean, you see a lot of places that are just publishing press releases. But what was fascinating is, so I don't know if you've heard about, like, for years, like, people were saying, no, the people interested in aging, which is the billionaire's primal compulsions to live forever. And so there's a lot of money going into anti-aging medicine or whatever they call it, gerontology. Very, very fascinated with that stuff. And so for years, people have been saying, no, you must take metformin. Metformin is like a diabetic drug. You know, at the moment we have like all these diabetic drugs.
Yeah, Ozempic.
Ozempic, but before Ozempic was metformin, which was meant to kind of keep you young for longer without having to do the exercise that we were talking about. No, but I went down reading about the metformin path and I was like, for sure, metformin, like David Sinclair, who runs the Harvard anti-aging thing, is on industrial doses of metformin. Anyway, they analyze the metformin paper, the most recent paper, and you see how they're analyzing it, and they do it from a scientific, these guys are from Stanford, so now they're like looking at the metformin.
Actually, discuss it and have to
do it the way. Yeah, apparently this is what they do at medical school. They used to have these like sort of things. They'd sit down and talk through the papers that get published in Science and whatever, and
almost
literally analyze them.
And almost like a debate, you have one person taking up one side of the argument, for example,
or just look at the statistics and what they're actually saying to you. And it transpires that metformin, like, and this is why these oaks stopped taking metformin about 4 years ago.
Was it poisonous?
Well, it transpires that even diabetics on metformin, on this like sort of double bind test, whatever. My point being, is not actually making such a radical difference, may actually be harmful. So you're like going, I have been reading X.
Nonsense.
At a certain level, people are taking medicine away from diabetics who actually do need it in order to live forever. And it's actually nonsense. But it's presented in a scientific way. And I just know, even from myself, as a person who is not a scientist, but is interested in reading the facts, I completely had bought this metformin thing for a long time. I know people on it who go, I'm not going to gym 5 times a week. I'm going to just take this metformin.
So what do you think of people who take this Ozempic? Because that's also very controversial. So that we still don't know, and even the best scientists, always the best scientists will say they don't know, but these guys say they're not sure of what the ultimate long-term consequences of something like this might be on the renal system with the kidneys and all the rest, because that's obviously where a lot of this, and the pancreas obviously comes into it too. And it's helping people to lose weight, but they get this stuff out of like poisonous lizards.
Yeah, it's the Gila monster.
The Gila monster. And have you seen what these things look like? And they're deadly, deadly poisonous. They get this out of these monsters. It's called a monster. This is the actual name. And then these people inject themselves with this. And Ozempic's expensive, apparently.
It's very expensive. It's created a shortage it is a diabetic medicine. But I think...
What do you think of this? People doing this, they're falling into this trend. And now you have celebrities and rich people all over the world. And they're all doing Ozempic and then eating whatever they want.
It's the
and
fountain of youth.
They're staying thin.
Well, it was quite fascinating to me because this guy, one of these guys on this Huberman Park, the guy they were analyzing the thing was like, and when I took metformin, I ate 12 donuts, and I was like, it's so very weird. I was like, really? So actually you just want to eat like shit. You want to put a plaster on top of your thing and find a shortcut, which I'm not saying that
it's like
this is not bad.
They want to have sex with everybody and then take AZT.
Yeah. Well, it may be like a very brilliant way of actually, because we do have an obesity epidemic in the world.
Yeah.
And instead of actually addressing, like this is my deep feeling about this.
Go on.
Instead of addressing like the sort of industrial complex that creates cheap food with lots of sugar additives. Like,
or go lay it down. Because how about personal responsibility,
also
not just
personal responsibility, but I
snacking like a
think
pig 24/7.
Well, I think there's a step before that, which is that people want cheap food. So
we want quick, affordable
people want
food.
quick, cheap food, which they really do. And if you look at what the ingredients in the quick, cheap food is, so bear with me.
Yeah.
The quick, cheap food is quick and cheap because it's highly processed.
Yeah.
And it's highly infused with sugar. So if you buy a loaf of white bread, which frankly is something that people buy because it is a staple thing, and you're a guy who's working on a long job, you're like, I was in the hospital the other day. The nurse, for example, is on a 12-hour shift. That is a long, hell of a long day.
They construction worker or whatever.
They don't have time to go out and like construct a meal from. Also, it's much more expensive to buy healthy food than to buy cheap food. So what you've got is a system that creates lots of very
convenience,
cheap, processed, fast food, polony, whatever. That stuff is infused with sugar. It goes straight to, it makes you fat. That's why we have a huge population problem with obesity, because people the world over are buying, and those companies
don't have a lot
running, they
I would agree
advertise.
I would
cheap
agree with
food.
you, but
On
there
the
are not.
other hand, you're saying, okay, now this is the great solution. We're going to give all these people that we're giving this cheap food this pill. So they're working towards making Ozempic or whatever it is.
So Ozempic's never going to get to these people anyway, because it's too expensive.
But in the long term, these are ideas that are in the market.
If you were right, China would be just chock full of fat people, and they're not.
China doesn't eat like that.
Right.
China eats traditionally.
Boom. But that's the point. So if even poor people in China, not big and obese.
Yeah, but but let me just say,
TikTok.
They're not. But there is, in fact, if you do look at the statistics, even in China, they are suffering with like sort of big obesity in small children, which is a function of a changing diet, which is changing.
I agree with you that there's a problem here, but
so that is my bottom line. Is that I think that what is happening in our society is we're happy, instead of addressing the issue and saying, how do we make people eat healthier?
There seems to be, though, but make people eat healthier. What, like government's going to come and tell you what to eat? Like they told us to wear masks?
Government can make a very big impact.
What Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma when she was in charge of the country?
I think what governments can do is say, actually, big industrial manufacturer of cheap food for our people.
You mean
which
like
we appreciate.
like the company McDonald's that our president used to be invested in?
Take down the sugar percentage in your food. That is what you can do, and it can make a much bigger difference. Apparently,
they'll just eat more.
They just they just don't.
They're craving the sugar because they have no self-control.
That is what the government can do: is moderate that kind of thing.
Aspasia, either
which they have a duty of care to their people.
Either we find the locus of control internally, or we find it externally. I find, and I don't disagree with you about all of these things, but the people who are running these fast food joints, why should they give a shit about your health? They're trying to sell burgers.
Yeah.
So they're only
enough, even McDonald's, which is obviously a gigantic multinational with an interest in making you eat more, hence giving you more sugar, did in fact cut down the sugar in their salad dressings and in their...
Please, who buys a McDonald's salad?
Well, but whatever. My
they
point
probably
is
sell 5 of those a year.
They did in fact make an effort to cut it down.
Didn't they get like sued?
But don't we? No. Here's the thing at the center of all of this is like, do we let people take responsibility for themselves, whether it's in media consumption, food consumption, whatever kind of consumption, or do we let government set those terms for us? Because we've realized, everyone on earth must have realized post-COVID, to trust the government to come up with the solutions is the very worst thing you can do.
I think it's a bit of both.
I mean, it's not even post-COVID. We're sitting in 6 hours of load shedding, whatever.
Yeah. So we know that we can't trust these people to make the decisions. So the best possible solution is to let people decide for themselves.
Save yourself. No one's going to save you.
But I do have some kind of concern that the idea that government, I mean, we have governments and we, the people, should be moderating what they do. So there is a level and a degree where you have to be engaged in civil society. So the more
There, I
we
agree with you completely.
isolate ourselves and say, well, the government is on its own trajectory. I give up. I'll look after my own little backyard. You still need to be conscious of the fact that, like, the government may be enabling shit
Of course they are.
that is
100%.
unhealthy for you.
They definitely are.
So civil society, which is engaged in some kind of conscious dialogue with government, I think is the ultimate way forward. Otherwise, we may as well give up and say, well, it doesn't matter. Like, okay,
So
we
what
have
do you-
Putin. And then here is the example, because this is where the logical result of some of this thinking is. If you say, well, I can only look after myself
Yeah.
in any context, and, great, we like enable a chap like Putin because autocracy has become a much bigger thing. And autocracy is like a kind of natural thing that happens in societies where
It's- you
people
could-
lose
Yeah.
faith.
You could say
In the
autocracy. You
government.
could say autocracy is the default setting. In
Yeah.
fact,
Yeah.
the
So
number
he
of
then gets-
democracies in history is hugely outweighed by the number of autocracies.
So what happens is that you then at the mercy and at the will of one oak who suddenly gets it in his mind that he wants to like sort of reestablish the greater Russia, and this is his great
And look what we've got.
hope
Yeah.
and glory, and he's martial, like, I mean, having meetings with Kim
Kim Jong-un.
Jong-un.
whatever, Jong-un, Kim Jong-il,
Yeah.
whichever one it is.
It's one of them.
Yeah,
The
they're
Jongs.
just like the Jongs.
Jong-un.
Did you see the interior of his train? How lovely
He's
was
got
that?
he's got a green armored train.
And inside, all the seats are pink. I just love the stuff. It's
But-
bubblegum pink. It's
so-
really cute.
You
But
would
I'm
you would
like,
appreciate
so
this. I
here are
got
these-
a book once as a gift from somebody. It's called Dictator Chic. Or something.
Yes, I've seen that
Have you
book. I
seen it?
love it.
It's like it shows you inside the houses of all these like Mobutu Sese Seko,
Yeah.
Hitler, Mussolini. Who was the guy?
Dictator Chic
Who
is
was
one
the guy
of
in
my
Romania?
favorite
Ceausescu.
elements, yes.
Ceausescu.
elements of my what the fuck column. Because I'm like, you can't make this stuff up.
Yeah.
They just hand it to you on a little
Dictators
plate.
have the worst taste for some reason.
Because they can like indulge like all
Yeah.
their sensibilities.
So
Putin has an aqua discoteca. Do you know about that?
what's that?
I mean, come, Gareth.
Aqua
Discoteca.
discoteca.
Sounds
So
like
it's,
Aqua, it is a
he does
subterranean discotheque.
party.
It's that like sort of
In the
thing
water.
in Sochi. No, you know how in Sochi has like this palace,
He has a
which
huge
is
palace, yeah.
the size of, I don't know, a small town. So this palace has the most marvelous thing called the Aqua Discoteca. It is a subterranean
club.
discotheque. Above him float the mermaids, and he gets to dance.
It's like, got to tell you, this
Oh.
Putin lifestyle is starting to appeal to
I
me.
just like the Putin lifestyle.
It's the mermaids that got
I
you.
need to ask you too about something that is going on though, and you're pretty good at like identifying trends and figuring out what people are interested in. I mean, you have to; it's part of your job almost. Vaping. Can we just talk about this for a second?
Ugh.
Because it seems like it's just going on, and people are okay. Now, again, I'm not one of these people who interferes. I'm never going to tell someone not to vape,
Sure.
but the kids are doing it,
Yeah.
A
and
lot.
they're doing it at ever younger ages.
Yeah.
And the stuff is socially way more acceptable than cigarettes because it doesn't smell like a cigarette.
Yeah.
Doesn't make your clothes smell like cigarettes. Most people don't mind
It's
if
just a
someone's vaping.
nicotine addiction.
It's wild though. Have
It
you
is.
seen how that? I think there are more people vaping now than ever were smoking.
I mean,
No,
it's-
100%.
And
And
also, it's the way you vape because
Yeah.
you can vape at all times.
everywhere you go,
Right.
anywhere you go, indoor, outdoor.
I saw some grown man the other day in a lift. Okay, this is a adult man with his in a lift,
Yeah. It's
and then he
it's-
sort of blows the
it's
smoke to
old-fashioned.
the side of his mouth so that it doesn't make that much smoke. But as soon as he gets out, then there are clouds of this stuff.
And vaping's also another thing where they haven't really figured out what the actual consequences are. There's
Right.
no facts. There's no. We've done
Can't
tests.
be good putting all those chemicals because it's
can't.
a chemical
It's a chemical.
thing that's
It's
happening.
not. They have
100% is.
discovered, they've done some I mean, I know I said something about the research papers before, but there is
Yeah.
some research that shows that it's bad for your lungs.
Yeah,
You
that's
get
not going to stop
popcorn lung.
anybody.
Yes.
Oh,
Have you,
But
you know
I
what
think
popcorn
it's
lung
like-
is?
oh, doesn't sound tasty.
You know that sound when, if you've ever been around someone who's got like emphysema, and when they breathe and it goes bubble, bubble, bubble
my
in
God.
their lungs. It's a horrible thing.
So I feel, well, there is a trend where a government intervention would actually be quite useful, because I think smoking is an example of a government intervention globally, in point of fact, where, to some extent, they managed to curtail the proliferation of just aggressive marketing around smoking, which took
Mhm.
and they made it more difficult for
Sure.
people to actually, because there is something where you have to say, okay, you have to this is why you've chosen a government, so that they can look into your health outcome and say it's not good for our population to all be dying of lung cancer at the age of 45.
You certainly want them taking mercury out of the food chain and that
You
kind
want
of thing.
them monitoring the water into the whatever.
I'm with you.
Yes. So I think that
Everything's
vaping is an
everything's a
example,
trade-off.
because
Everything's a trade-off.
vaping is just the cigarette companies finding a new route to market.
Yeah,
And
it's
what do you
like a little
think-
hubbly.
Yeah.
And what do you think of the
That
It's
you
a
take
portable
with you
hubbly that you take
everywhere.
everywhere.
people making those too? What do you think
So
of
making vaping, maybe they just have to vape outside the office in the pavement,
Yeah.
will just already diminish. And it's like by small percentages, because popcorn lung will come to bite you
Yeah.
at some
sounds,
point.
Sounds so horrible.
It
Popcorn.
really
lung.
does.
So what do you guys think
It's like
about
the black lung.
It's terrible. What do you think of do you think the legalization of weed has been a net good or net bad? We're only a couple of years in. People can smoke weed, they can buy small amounts. Do you
I
think it's
think-
been a good thing?
There is a lot of research that says anybody under 25 smoking weed is very bad, because your brain has not actually solidified. So I think there's another case of like weed. There's a very strong lobby
Yeah.
that got its way. But I think there's two things with weed that I always just say. Firstly, it's like the land of the lotus eaters. You smoke weed, and if you have a particular approach to life, or whatever, your personality is slightly like sort of lax, you will end up like, I had this friend who was big, like smoked weed like a cigarette, and you'd arrive at his house and he'd say, look at all the progress I've made. Hey? Like he was self-renovating the house, and it was like, this
DIY.
is a year later,
And nothing
you
had
have
happened.
managed to like paint a wall. Lots of progress. It's amazing. It's amazing, because like weed, there was nothing else. It was just like a year went by and he had managed to paint a whole grown ass wall. And then if you're under 25, your brain hasn't settled.
Yeah, I agree.
So, and there's a lot of like sort of relationship between smoking lots of weed as a young person and psychotic breaks. Like all the institutions are like littered with youthful weed smokers who like lost the plot.
And this
So I don't know.
explosion of depression and anxiety has a lot to do with not just weed, but I would say a sense of kind of hopelessness and purposelessness among young people in the world today. They're like, I don't know how I'm going to make a difference, so it makes me anxious.
Yeah.
So I'm going to smoke some weed.
I'll smoke some weed,
and
which
then
will
I'm
make
going to
me
tamp my brain down.
right.
And then I don't know, not everyone knows the psychiatric history of their families. So if you have, you just don't. Like but in every family there was like Batty Aunt Georgia who had, taken up with the cats or whatever. I'm just like, don't just go into it.
Just because it works for your friend doesn't mean it's going to work for you.
Yeah, don't go into it with complete like ignorance, because but yeah, I do think it's
So
it's also just a gigantic market.
So what sorts of things are you picking up on that people are doing, good or bad, good habits, bad habits? We talked about yoga earlier. It talked about boxing. That's a thing. And I mean, you wouldn't have found a woman in boxing 20 years ago. You'd have to have searched high and low. right?
Yeah, I
Now
think
it's a thing.
boxing is a thing. Yeah,
It's a thing now. So a lot of people seem to be doing these cold plunges. That's all that anyone's
Cape Town.
talking about.
Have you been to Cape Town lately? I think
It's a thing.
it's quite funny. So I went off to the
Cape Town is special.
to Saunders Rock and all those pools where people are having their cold water plunge. But they sit. So it's like actually hysterical. They sit in the plunge for minutes. I'm like, why don't you? It's fucking cold. Just why don't you swim? Sorry to swear.
No, go ahead. You're allowed here.
Have a little, whilst you're taking your cold water plunge, I'm not entirely opposed to this, but they sit like beached whales in the water. Like this.
50 seconds.
Like with their little heads above water going, great, eh? Great. I love this. That's great, eh? And then across on the wall, they have this wall. So then they all come out. It's called the Wailing Wall because the sun hits it. So they come out and stand on the Wailing Wall and thaw. And this friend of mine said, I'm going to pick you up because all the hotties are at this pool. So she picked me up from the hot yoga directly
so
to
you went
the
straight
cold
to
plunge.
cold plunge after hot yoga. That must have been quite good.
I was in it. I was very Swedish about this. Very Norwegian, very Finnish.
That's what they do.
I was very hot. And then
they go straight from the sauna into the ice.
Exactly. So off I go into the Atlantic seaboard ice. And there's two people. One who has clearly blown his brains on too much dope.
Sounds like Cape Town.
And the second one is like a chap with like some injuries on his face. And he's like scratching.
What?
Like, gosh, I said, you've clearly injured yourself. Yeah, he said it's self-inflicted. So I was like, what? You fell off your mountain bike on the, running on the pipe path? This is what they do in Cape Town. No, he said self-inflicted. I was like, and you're getting into this like little pool next to us to sit for 10 minutes.
With your injuries.
I said, this is not all you promised.
What's self-inflicted?
I said to my friend, this is not all you promised about the hot men in Cape Town.
But did
That
the
sounds
guy
dodge.
did the guy like hit himself?
Yeah, I think he was a skin picker
Oh, sis.
with a lot of anxiety.
That's
So
disgusting.
That was my experience of the
a
cold
skin
plunging.
picker.
Yes, sis.
Ugh.
It was quite divine. I was like,
Yeah, you didn't
Wow,
sign up
guys,
for that. Did
wow.
not
And you
sign up
saw
for
no
that.
Cape Town.
hotties.
I saw no hotties, but I saw a lot of people just sitting, looking completely baleful in this water at each other. I was like, just swim a little up and down.
What
this
are we
thing.
all doing?
It will make you feel better.
She's right though. Like your friend is right. Like Cape Townians do these weird rituals now,
Yeah.
and they've taken on new ones. And I mean,
There are lots of Gautengers there.
That's not just Cape
They've
Townians.
moved down
Right now,
in tribes.
Cape Town's like living in its own little bubble. It's like
Well,
a little island.
But
there.
a lot of
it
Joburgers
used to
have
be.
moved there.
Yeah.
We've opened their horizons a little bit. I mean, Cape Townians never met Joburg people only in December, really.
Yeah. Once a
Before
year.
now, they're living there. I feel like
It's very, very, very friendly down at that rock, let me tell you. All the people are chatting. I was like, these
That's
That's
not
not
very
Cape
Cape
Town.
Townian.
No. Speaking to each other, it's a little community. I was like, these people are all from Joburg.
Yeah.
And they have taken up cold water swimming
so. I think almost. You know how people are
and
recording.
skin picking.
You know how people are recording
thing.
like the Khoisan languages because they're different languages. They're recording them to try and keep a record of them because they're
Preserve
dying
them.
out.
Yes,
Right.
yes.
Yeah.
I think Cape Town, the way we used to talk about it for the last 20 or 30 years, as an idea, is not going to last very long because there's so many people from Joburg going in there. They're changing the culture
Yeah.
of Cape Town, and those very
Insular.
insular Cape Townians are going to
Culty
change. They're going to
pockets.
have to adapt.
Yeah.
Because, Cape Town has to adapt to Joburg, not the other way around.
Yeah.
Joburg people aren't going to go there and become Cape
Not
Townians.
a chance.
So I'm sorry, Cape Town, but you're going to lose your culture and your clickiness. You're going to have to.
I think it's a good thing.
It's a very
Good.
good thing.
Good. That's the only thing Cape Town needs. It's that like sense
An
of
infusion
community.
of
like
Joburgers.
yeah, like just like a bit of a more social
might-
environment.
It might spoil it.
That's not clicky.
It might spoil it.
I think it spoilt it already for people because have you seen the traffic in Cape Town?
So what's the solution? Do they want to all
And
run
have you
off?
seen the prices, the property prices? Because everyone in Joburg goes, all I'm looking for is just a little apartment in Sea Point with sea
You're
view.
like, well, you'll have to have 5 houses
and
that you could
3
sell here.
bedrooms.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh.
And so that's what anyone is looking for. So the whole place is, just there's a lot of pressure on Cape Town right now.
Well,
no wonder they're cold water
I-
swimming and
I-
picking their skin.
Adapt or die.
And I'll tell you what,
Cape
there's going to
Town.
be a bit of a reactive thing that happens there too, where a lot of Cape Townians will start getting a bit more than slightly pissed off with the Joburg people, because they only had to deal with us for mostly 1 month of the year, and now we're changing their culture, we're forcing them to acclimatize to us, that sort of thing, taking up space in their
Actually
neighborhoods,
hosting brides, because
doing things.
Cape Townians
They don't do that,
are like notoriously bad. Like, they'll say, we must do something.
and then you never see them again.
Then you never see them again. But Joburgers will actually host the braai. I don't know
Yeah.
how they're going to actually cope with such.
So, I mean, the good news, obviously, is with the cold plunging, you don't even really have to have a cold plunge bath or anything, because you won't have electricity to warm your water anyway. So we all have to take a
It's a
cold plunge.
win-win.
Yeah, cold shower at very least.
And you can do the Wim Hof breathing beforehand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, what's
Get
happened
into
what's happened to Durban? Durban used to have a vibe,
Sewage.
confidence.
I think it was sewage.
It's become a real shithole, to use Donald Trump's
Unfortunately.
term.
It's the sewage.
Like, I wouldn't.
But I don't know for sure. Hey, somebody was telling me that that mall,
The new one in Umhlanga? Umhlanga?
has
Schlong.
in
Umhlanga.
the very one
Yeah.
has a higher turnover than, or a similar turnover to Sandton City, which means that maybe Durban Central, like the but
Maybe.
Umhlanga has in fact
Thank you.
has in fact
Now we know how to say it. We're just saying it like
Yeah, it's-
people
it's
who
brilliant.
live
Yeah,
there.
I know.
Has in fact, that's where the rest of the Joburg crew has moved.
Someone in the comments said, "What happened to Gqeberha?" But who cares? Let's not even go there.
Yes.
So while we're talking about that, I do think that Sandton City is still it's an artifact in some ways. And I saw they're turning 50.
Yeah.
They've got a big
Can you
Can you
sign up
believe it?
Yeah.
that says they're turning 50. But I wondered about this because you pay attention to these things. And I've read a couple of your columns where you talk about those luxury stores in that Diamond Walk. Right? It's a fascinating cultural experiment that's going on here. People line up. They only let a few people in at a time
Yeah.
to these stores.
It's like a club.
But
It
people
was
are,
the old, that
Right.
was why you did it, to create a sense of,
Exclusivity.
you need to be in there.
but
So
they'll only
therefore line
let
up.
4 shoppers in at a time, and then people who there can't be that many rich people. Maybe it's not rich people; it's poor people who are going to spend a whole lot of their money on something that will make them feel a whole lot better. What do you think is going on there? It's
I
not
mean,
just the
are you
club
asking
thing.
me about like consumerist culture?
Yeah, especially when it comes to like Louis Vuitton and Gucci.
A little bit of I mean, what do they do? Unboxing on
because
the
when
Instagram.
when that who's
gram.
that Floyd Mayweather came here,
Oh, yeah.
and then there was all
Oh,
this noise about
Gareth was so pissed.
how he spent, I don't know, 75,000 Rand on a pair of shoes. It turned out to be nonsense. It was made up.
Yeah.
But people seem to be just in a very irrational way, obsessed with what other people are doing with their money when it comes to luxury goods,
Yeah.
especially in this country. So what do you think that is?
Well, I mean, are you asking me about
you wanna-
capitalism?
Do you want to think about it while I tell Gareth what I think?
Yeah.
People, some people in this country have their priorities in the wrong place. People that can't afford to purchase Louis Vuitton and Gucci and all of that stuff are going to Louis Vuitton and Gucci and all that stuff to buy these things, right? And that's a big part of almost like I have to look a certain way so that I can get more respect. It's the same concept as when you go to the clubs. You go to the clubs and it's the same people raking up bills of 126,000 Rand in one night.
popping the bottle?
Popping the bottles. You have no business spending that much money on alcohol in one night, but you want to look flashy, you want to look cool, you want to look like the guy. That's a big
This
part
is your
of
way of getting social cachet.
That's it. That is literally it. And that's what's happening at these Gucci stores. Half these people, they can't afford it. but there they are buying this stuff, and how they're getting the money to buy it, and not all of them, but how they're getting the money to buy that stuff is also like, it's a bit sus. It's questionable.
Of course. Look, I've been in store entertainment in many of these places where, and have seen like sort of their top customers.
Yeah.
And there's a circulation of the same customers going around from place to place. And obviously the stores cultivate them.
Yeah. And
it is a combination of people. So I think there's like definitely the very there is a lot of wealth.
Yeah. Look,
from various sources, legitimate, illegitimate, whatever. Of course. There's lots of people coming in with like straight up cash.
Yeah.
Especially during COVID. I mean, in COVID, it was fascinating. That's when those queues started forming. Because they weren't letting people in at the same time. And there was a lot of different cash that was coming in from the PPE stuff. So that was like very interesting. There were people who, because they suddenly got this cash and they needed to
wash it
with the
or
quickness.
just do what it was that they always dreamed of getting. So it's a twofold thing. One is, if you think about the money that is spent marketing these brands and generating these ideas around what is luxury and why you would want it. And the brands themselves are very careful about like generating two kinds of things. One, they want the like really exclusive stuff that you have to be in the know. And then they have like these lost leaders, things which people want to enter and demonstrate some kind of all these things
some kind of
that
belonging.
you've arrived. It's an
Yeah.
arrival. It's an
That's all.
aspirational culture.
Yeah.
Like
And
we live in a
again,
very aspirational
but I
culture.
suppose like if there's a theme that's going through
And that
this,
is Instagram, that is
Yes, I was
social
gonna say
media,
the pressure as well.
that is stuff that says, which is much more heightened than it even was.
But if
because
there's a theme that goes through all of this, it's kind of like, do we let people make terrible decisions, whether it's vaping, spending every cent of their paycheck on a pair of shoes, going to extraordinary lengths to impress other people, eating hamburgers instead of eating salads. Like,
do we find Putin to come tell them what to do?
Right. So like, are those the only two options? Because if we say there's a balance in between, you're going to end up with, again, I'll never forget, there was this guy who I interviewed years ago called Yusuf Saluji. He was with the South African Anti-Smoking Coalition or something. And this guy was such a smoke Nazi. He was such an authoritarian that after I'd interviewed him, I thought, I almost want to start smoking just because I'd rather do that than end up like him.
I mean, I hate to say it, but when you meet certain people, like there was a period where I was exposed to like a very, very like authoritarian environmentalist. And I just wanted to start a landfill in my back garden. Like, I am planting nappies.
I'm going to show you.
You're rebellious. That's basically what you
I'm going to plant all the nappies.
Yeah.
Listen, I love seeing you. I love talking to you. And it's so good to have you in the studio again.
Indeed.
Keep writing your good stuff. We love to hear from you. And we'll see you again soon, Aspasia.
I think we should have a
nice
hot
idea.
brunch.
That's a good idea.
Here, where I will write my column.
Have you seen our garden?
I will come and do my interview of you over brunch, and we'll put it in the Sunday Times. That old
rag
of mine.
I
Don't you think that will be fun?
I did use it I used it a few times this winter for making fires.
And we have our uses. And we are also very, very mindful of the fact that today's news is tomorrow's kitty litter.
Damn right. That keeps you humble, right?
It does.
Yeah.
It's lovely to see you. Thank you, Aspasia. Lebang, we'll be back next week with you, but also back tomorrow morning early for, among other things, the Burning Platform with Pumi Mashiko. And it's going to be, as always, hot. Good guest coming on to join us tomorrow, someone who I think everybody's going to want to hear from. He is a mayor who's got his hands full at the moment with strikes and all kinds of things. And definitely someone we haven't had on the show before. So not Cape Town. No cold plunge
Yeah, that
mails.
was my first thought. Like, strikes Cape Town.
So that'll be interesting. Tomorrow, all of that and more on the way. Have an awesome day, everybody. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.